Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving straight into a real-life geopolitical thriller that honestly sounds like it was ripped straight out of a Cold War spy novel. We're going to unpack the monumental challenge of tracking global nuclear materials, the absolute extremes nations will go to acquire them, and the deeply unsettling reality of just how easily the building blocks for the world's most destructive weapons can slip right through the cracks. All right, let's get into it.
Picture this. It's 1968. You have a massive cargo freighter sailing right through the middle of the ocean. Deep down in its hull sits 200 tons of uranium oxide. That is the exact raw material you need to fuel a nuclear weapons program. And then, somewhere in the vastness of the Mediterranean, that entire cargo simply vanishes into thin air. How in the world does a staggering 200 tons of highly regulated nuclear material just disappear without a trace? Well, to understand how they pulled this off, we have to look at a fundamental flaw in global nuclear security.
Section 1. The uranium tracking problem.
So uranium isn't some incredibly rare, localized resource. It's naturally occurring, and believe it or not, it's about as abundant on Earth as arsenic or molybdenum. It is mined all over the place, dozens of countries across every major continent. And this vast global distribution makes containing and regulating the raw source material a massive, almost impossible headache for international authorities. It's literally everywhere.
And it's not even just uranium. Take a look at the sheer volume of another nuclear source material, thorium. Thorium can also be processed for weapons applications, and guess what? It is roughly 3 times more abundant than uranium. It's found in small amounts in most rocks and soils, making it about as common as lead. The sheer, overwhelming natural abundance of these materials really sets the stage for everything we're about to cover.
Section 2. Building the Dimona Secret.
Let's look at a prime example, the Shimon Peres Negev Nuclear Research Center, which most people just call the Dimona facility. This place evolved at a truly shocking pace. Secret construction began in 1958 with some help from the French. By 1964, U.S. intelligence had spotted the site, which obviously triggered American inspections. Yet remarkably, by the 1967 Six-Day War, the first nuclear warheads were reportedly already good to go. So how on earth did they build a massive nuclear facility right under the international community's nose? The answer is absolute secrecy and some truly brilliant deception. To get massive, highly specialized nuclear components out of Europe, they needed a foolproof cover story. So they tricked French customs officials into believing that this enormous reactor tank and all the heavy components weren't for a nuclear facility at all. Nope. They claimed they were just parts for a desalination plant heading over to Latin America. And it worked. But the deception definitely didn't stop at customs. When the U.S. demanded to inspect the facility between 1965 and 1969, Israel said yes, but with one major condition. They required advance notice of any visit. And using that precious lead time, they literally built temporary false walls right before the inspectors showed up. It's wild, but they managed to completely conceal a massive underground reprocessing facility. And that is the exact technology you need to transform spent reactor fuel into weapons-grade plutonium.
Now, to actually make that plutonium, you first need a steady, totally untracked supply of raw fuel. Which brings us to a critical term you need to know: yellowcake. Yellowcake is processed uranium ore. It's the absolute essential raw material needed to fuel a nuclear reactor. If a determined nation wants to build a nuclear program off the books, acquiring a massive amount of unsafeguarded yellowcake is step number 1. And Israel needed a lot of it.
Section 3. The Argentine yellowcake buy.
In 1964, a pretty incredible global intelligence relay race kicked off. Canadian intelligence analysts suspected something was off and flagged it to Great Britain. The British took this unverified intel and passed it along to the CIA. Finally, the U.S. State Department had their embassy in Argentina look into it locally. And what they confirmed was absolutely staggering. Back in 1963, Argentina had secretly sold 80 to 100 tons of yellowcake to Israel, completely bypassing strict international safeguards. This discovery sent absolute shockwaves through Western intelligence. One British diplomat summed up the chilling reality perfectly in 1964, stating, "This means that Israel now has virtually unlimited supplies of uranium free of safeguards." The raw materials for a nuclear weapon were completely off the international radar. And because of diplomatic sensitivities at the time, the U.S. was basically powerless to reverse the sale.
Section 4. The Plumbat Heist.
So, we just talked about administrative evasion, using diplomatic loopholes to quietly move yellowcake out of Argentina. But after the 1967 war,
France stopped supplying Israel with fuel, meaning administrative evasion just wasn't going to cut it anymore. So they pivoted to straight-up physical theft. We're talking front companies, forged passports, and a literal cargo heist in the middle of the ocean. This was Operation Plumbat.
Here's the exact playbook of how they pulled this off in 1968. Step 1, Mossad agents set up a fake Liberian front company to buy an ocean freighter, which they renamed the Scheersburg A. Step 2, they legally purchased 200 tons of Congolese uranium from a Belgian mining company, claiming they were going to process it in Italy. They even harmlessly labeled the barrels Plumbat, which just means lead. Step 3, they completely replaced the original crew with Mossad agents carrying forged passports. And Step 4, under the cover of darkness out in the Mediterranean, they silently transferred all 200 tons over to an Israeli freighter.
When the Scheersburg A finally docked in Turkey 8 days later, it was completely empty. The ship's logs? Mysteriously missing with the pages literally torn out. That contract with the Italian paint company? Abruptly canceled. The Italian company actually just assumed the cargo had been lost to pirates. 200 tons of uranium simply vanished.
The sheer audacity of Operation Plumbat stayed a complete ghost story until 1973. A suspected Mossad operative named Dan Ert was sitting in a Norwegian prison after a totally unrelated botched assassination attempt. Desperate to prove to his interrogators that he was in fact a high-level operative, he spilled the beans and confessed the whole story. Investigators checked, and sure enough, his name was listed as the president of the front company that bought the Scheersburg A. The truth was finally out.
Section 5. The Illusion of Control.
Now let's zoom out and bring this back to the present day. Because if you think this kind of evasion is just some relic of the Cold War, think again. It is still very real. North Korea completely bypassed administrative controls to build undeclared enrichment facilities. And in 2005, Tanzanian customs actually intercepted a massive shipment of illicit uranium from the Congo that was hidden inside a shipment of rare minerals. The silver lining there? It was only caught because of modern physical radiation detectors installed under the U.S. Megaports program.
But the fear of covert programs successfully hiding these materials has very real, very kinetic consequences. We've seen this tension drive direct military action for decades. In 1981, Israel bombed Iraq's Osirak reactor out of fear that they were hoarding natural uranium for weapons. In 2021, a Syrian missile landed near Dimona. And most recently, during the 2026 Iran war, we saw retaliatory strikes directly targeting the Dimona facility. The stakes of untracked nuclear materials frequently boil over into real conflict.
Which brings us to a pretty sobering conclusion from our source material. It states, tracking of source materials cannot in itself prevent development of weapons, but it can be one small tool in the process to detect and slow the diversion of materials. So whether we're talking about diplomatic rules or high-tech seaport detectors, tracking is absolutely helpful. But as history proves time and time again, it is definitely not a foolproof shield against a determined state. So I'm going to leave you with this final thought. If a nation is willing to fake entire desalination plants, literally build false walls to fool inspectors, and execute a 200-ton heist in the dead of night in the middle of the ocean, are today's modern physical controls truly enough to stop them from building the ultimate weapon? It's exactly the kind of question that keeps global security experts awake at night. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and as always, keep questioning what you see.